You're listening to the Canned Fruit Podcast with your favorite trio, Danielle, Jess, and Kia. We will have meaningful conversations on what it looks like to have compassion and respect when communicating with others. This show is a safe and brave space to open up, so let's start.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Canned Fruits, the podcast about candid and fruitful conversations. This is your girl, Kia, here with two of my favorite ladies, Miss Jessica and Miss Danielle.
Hello. Hello.
There's some raising the roof going on.
We're always so excited.
We're so excited to talk about mistakes and apologizing.
I'm excited to talk to you all about something I'm not good at.
Ooh, all right. I think we switch off, every episode. Like, this is something that I'm great at. This is something that I'm not so good at. This, I'll say, maybe admitting mistakes, not so much, but apologizing, I'm pretty good at. We've talked a lot about the components of our conversations, setting ourselves up for successful conversations, and a lot about thinking about ourselves and the other people in our conversations. But what happens when your conversation doesn't go exactly how you expected? And you might realize, because remember, we're all growing. That could have gone better. And maybe I need to reach out to the other person or people and either admit a mistake, or your hard conversation is the apology itself. So Jessica found some very enlightening research about why some of us might have a bit of a problem or a bit of a challenge with apologies.
Yeah, I was reading on Psychology Today.
Hey now.
I was reading
my bathroom reading.
Yeah. I was reading on Psychology Today because I was thinking about last time we kind of got off on a resolution. What does that look like? And kind of the differences on how we think about resolutions. And I was thinking about this topic and apologies, and I was thinking about why some people, I am included in that, I'm included in some people, why we struggle with apologies. And we had some kind of listed here as feelings that we have when we're trying to apologize, and like why they're hard, because you might feel embarrassed or shame or vulnerable or whatever. But there's actually been quite a bit of research done about this. There's a psychologist, Karina Schumann, who has done some research about this, and she's identified 3 different barriers to apologies. And one is low levels of concern for either the victim or the relationship. And this is kind of like, if you think about a person who has a lack of empathy, they're less likely to apologize because they're not comfortable with closeness. And so they don't want to apologize. They don't see it as valid because they don't believe anything good is going to come of it in the relationship. They don't see any value in the relationship at all. They think they can do without the relationship. This is kind of something that I identify with sometimes. The next one is threat to self-image, and that is people who are narcissists. They don't want to admit that they're wrong because their value, they see their own value in being kind of perfect in a way. And so to admit a mistake, to have an apology, would be to say that they're wrong in some way, that they're less than perfect. And the last one, and this one is less research, this one has a little bit less going for it, and that is perceived ineffectiveness of an apology. That an apology, that if they apologize, the other person isn't actually going to forgive them anyway. So do you guys identify with any of those? I know I do. I identify with one of those specifically.
I would say I oppositely identify
Okay.
The third one, just looking at that, when you don't apologize because you don't think the other person will forgive you or will forgive you, is I'm trying to figure out if this is the right way of thinking, but when I'm apologizing to someone, it's more of an acknowledgement that I hurt their feelings and is to make me feel better. So I don't need for them to forgive me, but I want to acknowledge that I did something against my maybe not my morals, but my values, or I did something that or said something that I know not necessarily was contradictory to their values, but hurt their feelings or hurt their values in some type of way. So I want to acknowledge that part. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just acknowledging that I've hurt you, or something I think I might have hurt you, or I did something that I don't think was kind. And then if you decide you don't want to forgive me, you are your own person. You are autonomous. I feel like everyone is in charge of their own autonomy. So I can't do anything about that. So that's my spiel on apologies.
Reverse apology. Yes. Why you're good at apologies. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
actually.
I guess. Yeah, maybe. And it's interesting because the first one is like people who have low empathy, and he said something else and the first one that I sort of kind of identify with, but, again, I'm working on my empathy. So maybe that's why I'm so better at it. But feeling low levels of concern for the relationship, even if in relationships where maybe it's like more like a colleague relationship, because remember all my barriers, it's more of a colleague relationship than a friendship relationship, I will still apologize because, again, it's just for me, because then I can continue to look them in the eye and not have issues, and knowing that I lived up to what I believe in.
Phew. Okay. I guess.
It's your turn.
I guess I have to talk on this episode. This is going to be the one where I say nothing.
Just sit back and learn, Danielle, I guess.
Yeah. More like, I'm like, you guys can figure out how to apologize. I don't need to. I'm never wrong. Comes to why I struggle with these three, because I'm not sure where I fit in. I don't necessarily know if it's level of concern, because I do think I'm deeply concerned about the person. Maybe what I'm struggling with is I don't recall memories of when I've apologized. So I'm really having a hard time placing it. And either it's because I don't like them so much that I put them out of my memory, or I'll use my daughters because they are humans I love and that I respect, and I have apologized with them, but this is noting how hard it is because they're the only people I can remember apologizing to. And sometimes I'll get upset, and I think of apologies differently. This is a lot of ramble to say. I'm not one to say I'm sorry. I'm one to say, this was my thinking. I'm realizing I'm really bad at apologies.
The first sentence, and I having an enlightenment moment here.
Yeah, I think it's happening live. Just because I guess I'm just realizing that I feel justified in a lot of things that I say. I try really hard to think before I speak. And so I'm not saying that shifts me away from ever being wrong. Absolutely not. I just think that I think it's just really hard for me, guys. I would see that it's not that I have, maybe it is the second one, and that's what I don't want to admit to, is because I definitely am not concerned with breaking the relationship. I feel like it's so big that I should do that. If I don't think it will elicit forgiveness, then that goes back to the relationship being one that maybe wasn't I didn't value as much, but that person doesn't see me as being open to forgiveness. Yep. And so maybe it's that I just so try to not be a person that does things that hurt people, that it's hard for me to apologize because I have to reckon with the fact that it hurt people. And we've come to an answer, but you see how long it took me to get there.
That's okay.
Breakthroughs. It's okay.
That's right.
Happening live.
So Oh, well, I'll say, so we talked a little bit about your thought process and how you put a lot of thought into even before engaging about how that'll make people feel. And you talked a little bit about how maybe you don't think you make as many mistakes. Not that you're faultless.
Nope. Never
Careful
said
verbiage.
that.
Careful.
So do you think that it's hard for you to admit that you made a mistake, or that you maybe just make fewer of them?
Oh man, on the episodes where I don't want to talk, everybody's making me talk.
We're digging it out.
I think thinking about things before you say something is helpful, just in general. Yeah. I do think that's a practice that I find important. But as someone that talks a lot, it's inevitable that you will say the wrong thing. And have I done that before? Yes. So I guess is your question, Kia, by thinking in advance, has that alleviated some of the, I think let me just say this. I think it's a mix of what you're hearing from me is that I do think a lot about what I want to say. I channel other people into my conversations. I say, hey, Kia, Jessica, what do you think about this before I say this really inappropriate thing about how I feel about you? Can you give me some insight into a better way to do that? I think that's something I've done for a long time. I am also a little righteous. So there's also that on the other end. And so I'm walking this line of, I don't make a lot of mistakes because I think about it, but I also don't think I make a lot of mistakes because I'm righteous and I think I'm right.
What about you, Jessica?
It takes me a while to recognize my feelings. And so I am prone to respond before I have processed. And so I make mistakes often. I hurt other people's feelings pretty frequently. And I think what makes apologies hard for me, the most hard apologies, are when I also feel wronged. Because conversations have this way of flowing, right? Where you say something, the other person says something, they have a feeling about what you've said, and then they respond based on the feeling that they're currently having. And then you have a feeling about what they said to you, and you respond based on the feeling that you're having. And so really difficult apologies for me are not when I truly feel like I've done wrong. That to me is easier to say, I really made a mistake there. Like I know in my mind, in my heart, in my body, I know that I was wrong to do that, to say that, whatever. But it's the ones when I also feel wronged at the same time, when I feel like I deserve an apology, and I also should be giving an apology at the same time. Those are the tough ones.
Is it almost like a game of chicken? Like who's going to apologize first?
So can I just say, Jessica, you've really helped me hit why I was struggling earlier. Mm-hmm. There's not many times where I'm in a situation. I kind of sound like a jerk who never does anything wrong. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. But the ones I can remember where I've had the hardest time saying I'm sorry, it's because my feelings were hurt as well, and they were not validated.
Yep.
And I actually don't even think it's a game of chicken. I'm fine with saying I've done this thing wrong. But the minute I don't hear you recognize your part, I get and that's where the righteousness comes in. So This is what I'm talking about. The line I'm dancing on is like, I'm good at it when we're doing this, where it's like, Jessica, I said this. And you're like, yeah, I said this. And kumbaya, we're back together.
Yeah.
When Jessica doesn't, she's like, oh yeah, cool. Thank you. That's the worst response I can get. When I've said something, I've done something wrong, and then they say, thank you. Like, are you kidding me right now? And then
what about you?
Right. Right. So in my case, it's not chicken. I'm not dancing with them to see who does it first, but I am hoping for the community that we can both recognize where we might have done something wrong. Maybe that's not always the case though.
I'm sorry. That's why I brought up these 3 reasons why people might struggle to apologize, because I wanted to give myself an opportunity for empathy for another person and why they might really struggle with apologies. I wanted to understand, why is it sometimes that when I feel hurt, I don't get that apology? Why is it? Is it because the other person doesn't value me as a person or doesn't value our relationship? Maybe sometimes, generally I would say with strangers, right? That's the case. Like, oh, they really don't care about me. They don't care that they've hurt my feelings.
Yep.
Or is it that this apology is something very personal to that person, that they feel like if they admit this wrong, that it's attacking their character? Okay, that's easier for me to understand. Like, oh, you feel like apologizing to me is an admission of fault in your character, a flaw. Or is it that you don't think I am going to forgive you? What can I do to better help you feel like your apologies mean something to me, right? Like on the receiving end. That's why I wanted to get these three of like, why do people not apologize to me?
To you specifically.
To me.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because it's that last one that I'm struggling with most, that because if I apologize, someone might not apologize because they think in their apology, the other person won't forgive them. Does that ever enter into your calculus for apologies? I need to just take some time to think about it, but I just can't, because my apologies are so self-centered.
They're for me.
I have a hard time getting on with that one.
I think that's fair. I think that this one, so the last one is actually the least researched of the three. And so I think it's because the way people phrase their apologies sometimes, that might come off as like a defensive apology. And so it kind of gets lumped into the first one instead. And
like, I'm sorry that your feelings are hurt, that type of apology.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know how to make that seem more tangible for you, but
that's totally fine. I'm going to keep thinking about it. This late breaking apologies research.
This is really like breaking us down. This is like, we usually have so many specific examples, of like reference points. And it's just like, why does this not connect,
Yeah. Well, I can say for me, it's because I'm bad at them.
Well,
it's hard to talk.
The ditto.
It's hard to talk with confidence about something that you really struggle with. That's how I feel. I feel certain things, it depends on the thing. Certain things for me are so easy to apologize for. And certain things I just, like you were saying earlier, Danielle, I feel justified. Like I feel like that was standing in my truth. I feel like that was my truth. I feel like, but how did you want me to say it differently? Like, this is where I was coming from. This is what I felt. And I don't apologize for my feelings coming out properly to you. That's how that's what I wanted to communicate to you.
So I talked a little bit about, maybe a lot of it, about how I mostly am apologizing for myself, but also when I'm giving the apology to someone, it's not to elicit their forgiveness. Like, I do hope that people forgive me for whatever I'm apologizing for, but it's not a requirement. And one of a good analogy that I like to use sometimes is gifts. My husband's getting better at this, but it's so interesting because he gives people gifts and he goes, oh, they did this with the gift. Like, he'll give a gift to our nephew and he'll be like, and then he broke it. Or he'll give a gift to someone else and then they sold it, right? And I'm just like, well, you gave that to them. That is now theirs to do whatever they would like to with it. That's no longer yours. In fact, it wasn't yours. You bought it for the express purpose of giving it to someone else. So that's how I like to think of my apologies. Less than that they're a gift. You should be so lucky to get an apology from me, but more that I have taken this, I've given it to you. It is now yours to do with whatever you would like to do.
It's like a release of control of the situation, right? Of like, I've done my part, and what you choose to do with that is on you, right? If you choose to forgive me, if you choose to apologize back to me, if you right, I see.
I am really eager to explore the connection to emotional intelligence and apologies, because as you say that, Kia, all I hear is it requires so much self-confidence to do that. If you are attached to the opinion of the people across from you, outside of you, it's really hard to do that. If you are doing it like, so even as you joke about it being like about you, even when you say it that way, it is about like your responsibility to offer this up because you recognize you've done something wrong, independent of how anybody else reacts to that. And it's only in you saying that I'm like, now I have to admit that I got some emotional intelligence work and like stuff to work on when I thought I was pretty awesome at it. But then, now it's this thought of, okay, I have to release myself, not just of the apology, but release myself of the opinion of the other person. Because if it's someone you love, again, going back to your examples, Jessica, like if you care about the relationship, the person will just choose to forgive you, yea or nay, more likely yes than not, but the relationship will have to explore its next direction, but you still have to do this as an individual. And I'm like, oh boy. That was like, that's a technical term.
Oh boy.
Technical term. No, you bring up a good point, because I do find that I'm just in life generally very independent, and I don't want to say, because I don't believe that I'm self-centered, but self-referencing. There we go.
There it is.
That's the best term. I'm very much self-referencing, and not that I don't take in, but I don't necessarily need a lot of external references. I love the points that you bring up, and that's people who are more externally referencing that possible change in the relationship would definitely impact their ability to or the way that they may offer up apologies or admit mistakes.
So Kia, you can't just skip over that brilliance. I mean, I know it started from like, it's piggybacking off of lots of different things we've said, but the way the self-referencing versus is it externally referencing, right?
That's what I'm calling it, at least.
This is our we put a trademark on it.
Well, self-referencing, I know is real.
Let it go, Kia.
It's ours. Stop.
Well, I guess I'm just thinking about what you're saying, because I used the word emotional intelligence and I was making a judgment there in a way that you're not when you say self-referencing. Because I internalize it as there must be something wrong with me because I wonder about because I think about the opinion of the other person. That there are strengths in that. And so I want to pull back from my statement a bit, because that's my work, is realizing that that's not a weakness in understanding in the other person and kind of reading the room. I think the emotional intelligence becomes an issue is if that cripples your ability to walk in your truth, as we've been talking about, and recognize when you're wrong. But you might have a leaning one way or the other, and that's okay.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's more than accurate. So you bring up that understanding that you might be wrong, and
might
possibly.
Big
and might. I think that so we've talked about apologies, how we feel about apologies, but how do we apologize? What are the components of a good apology?
I don't know.
Wrong two people, Kia.
This is not our episode. This is not ours.
Well, I've found that there are 7 steps or 7 components of a apology, especially when it's something more challenging. And that's what we focus on, the more challenging discussions.
Okay.
And I'll go over the 7 steps or the 7 parts of it. And then I'll also offer up a time when I apologize, an example of how my self-referencing apologies go. So first is to recognize your mistake and understand what you did wrong. Second, be sincere. Third, don't delay. And that's on both parts. If you delay in bringing up the issue, then it makes these steps harder. And actually, I have some more examples of when I've delayed and it's made the apology like just that much more tougher. Take ownership. Correct your behavior. So if this is something that you're doing regularly, then you might want to change that part of it. And then listen. And so we've talked a lot about active listening already. Oh, and then don't expect a return apology.
Oh, no. Maybe, can you read that one more time?
I feel like it's time for me to go.
Yeah, so
it's time for me to go. Do anything with this.
It's a solo podcast today, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, she is on her own. I love when you said you had an example, and I was like, I'm good. One of us does.
So I don't know if we'll be able to dissect it a little bit. So I'm not sure if I actually went through all of these steps because this example was several years ago before I've been so enlightened. But it's a good example of how my self-referencing apologies work. So I'm at work. And, we're having a little chit chat. There's a group of us, maybe 3 or 4 of us. And someone who they're firmly in the colleague field and not necessarily in the friend type field. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about their upcoming wedding. They just got proposed to, so they're planning their wedding. And in the conversation, they talk about their first wedding. And in their first wedding, they had a big church wedding and all these other things that they're talking about. Then they talked about their second wedding, and I can't quite remember what happened at the second wedding. And then they talked about their third wedding, and I can't quite remember what happened at the third wedding. And then they talked about what they wanted to do because this would have been their 4th marriage. And they were, I guess they were like weighing options or something. And I will say after this point, I've gotten much better at my filter. So sometimes I might slow blink, and that's me filtering all the words in my head to make sure that they're appropriate. Because my response was, no one wants to go to your 4th wedding. Not
to put the words back in.
And as soon as I said it, I wanted to pull them right back into my mouth. But I couldn't. I had already said that because, they were talking about the planning and maybe like gifts or something. And I was just like, if I went to 3 of them, why would I go to your 4th one? Which is, an inside thought. That's absolutely an inside of your head thought. So, everybody laughed, maybe a little awkwardly, then went on with the conversation.
This was in front of other people.
Yeah, it was maybe 4 of us, so me, her, and 1 or 2 other people. And so later that day, I came back and I apologized. And I said, I don't remember my exact words, but I basically said, I'm sorry. What I said was hurtful. I don't know if I've said it out loud, but in my head, I think, it's not my wedding, not my business. I would have said it nicer than that, something like that. And so then later, because I still, even though I'm self-referencing, I did like that person, or still do. I guess I don't see them much, and I went and I knew that they like to drink. So I made them a rum cake, a Jamaican rum cake, a Caribbean rum cake.
Thank you, Kia.
That little yellow bundt cake that people, and they got a little rum icing. I'm disappointed every time someone says, oh, I brought rum cake. And I'm like, where is it at? And it's this yellow cake with rum icing. And I'm like, that's not what I want. A Jamaican black cake. That's what I made, which is basically entirely alcohol. So I made that and gave it to her and just apologized again and offered up my black cake for her, which is, if you've ever made it, a lot of effort. We didn't really we weren't really socially sociable. I don't know. After that, it became fine to me. And that's the self-referencing part. I apologize. I offered this gift. I apologized twice and offered this gift. And that made me feel better about my part in hurting their feelings and not living up to my values and being kind and not hurting other people's feelings. And then after that, you know, we still work together fine. Like, it's not like then they tried to trash my career or something like that, but maybe we're as social, and I can absolutely understand that. And I was fine with it. So that's my self-referencing part. Let's dissect that, please.
Well, I just want to start off by saying that it's really brave of you, Kia, to share a moment where you've been flawed, because as I sit here, and I'm not going to speak for Jessica, but as I sit here, not even being able to recall the moments where I've been wrong and kind of joke that it's never happened when we all know it has, it's just powerful that you processed it, right? You took it in and you reference it as a place for opportunity for growth in a real way. And so I want to put words to that, because that's part of what this process is. And, you know, hopefully after this conversation, I can remember. I might have to start a journal of my mistakes.
It'll be a small, teeny tiny.
Oh, it'll
be one sheet of paper folded. Like, that's what it'll be.
All right. I'll take it. Y'all love me, but go ahead.
Wow.
So I'll say if we go through our apology steps, I recognized my mistake. I understood what I did wrong. I was very sincere in my apology. At least I believe I was sincere, or I tried to show my sincerity as I was apologizing. I did a delay. The first apology was that day. The second apology was a few days later, because it takes several days to make a rum cake. I mean, it really could take me months to make it, but I did it in several days. I took ownership. I hurt her feelings. I said something wrong, or I said something that could have been hurtful, because I didn't want to tell her that I hurt her feelings, but I know that I said something hurtful.
Right.
I corrected my behavior. Well, I guess there's not one of my corrections is that I now take a little bit longer to filter, regardless of the company I'm in front of, because I think one reason why my filter might have been a little bit lower is that one of the other people in the conversation is someone I was very close to. So like, I wouldn't normally need to filter my thoughts that much. So I do take a little bit more time to filter. Listen, she didn't really say anything back. She told me, like, oh, it's okay. And, like sometimes people say, oh, it's okay, and they actually don't really mean it. But I listened to her. She didn't really, have much to say back. And I mean, at this point, there was no return apology that she would need to deliver. But yeah.
Man.
So I think I did a pretty okay job without knowing any of these steps.
Yes, you did.
Look at me.
Yes, you did. I think my favorite part is that I don't know what the proper terms are for this, but you put blame on your action, which I think is because I heard you say, I don't know, obviously you don't remember your exact words, but you said, what I said was hurtful, right? And I think that this is like a really subtle thing, but really important, that you put blame on the action, on the thing that you did, instead of saying, I hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
Right. You're saying what I said, though, that specific thing that I did was hurtful to you or was unkind or whatever. But I think that's something that's so subtle and so valuable. And I think it might help Danielle and I to not be like, I was wrong. You're allowed to have these moments. You're allowed to have these mistakes that are wrong. And again, we've said this in earlier podcasts, that doesn't make you a flawed person. Just because you have a moment, it doesn't reflect on your character, right? And putting it that way is so relieving in a way.
Can I jump in there, Jessica? It is relieving. I feel lighter, and it's not even my story.
Right.
I wonder, maybe this is for another time, but my gut is saying I need to inquire what your experience with apologies were like in the past, Kia, from as a receiver, And I don't recall, again, this is really interesting that I cannot identify moments where even I've been given an apology that was thoughtful. That's not that it did not happen. It's just that I cannot recall them. And that still suggests that they weren't so frequent that it became a learned behavior. I witnessed it so I could recreate it. Again, on this show, we are not victims of our experience. That doesn't allow me to not give an apology. I'm just curious how you came to be in a position to be able to do that. That's the question. I guess the statement is that it's also practice, right? Because I think I've gotten better at it, even if I can't recall it, but it just requires so much of that resolve that you have, Kia, that calm consistency that Jessica and I will laugh at when we're talking about something that makes you uncomfortable, but in this moment, this is why you're thriving. This is not why you're thriving. You thrive for a lot of reasons, but this is why I can see you being really good because you're just so grounded in your own existence. And so I'm just really learning a lot because I did not realize it would trigger me in the way it is because I guess what did you just say, Jessica? You said something about her language around naming the behavior.
Yeah.
And just, that's just good language for me to hold on to and reference. This is what I say. I no longer say, don't say this, say that, don't say, I'm sorry if you feel that way. Because that's my righteousness coming on because I'm now preparing the case, lawyer by training, for what you did wrong. There's two sides to every story. You did wrong and I did wrong. So let's put them both out on the table. And that's not what this is about. It's irrelevant if the other person puts it on the table. This is so much about you. And I'm just floored by, I'm in awe of how this is
seriously
going.
When you just talked about my experience with receiving apologies, now I'm flabbergasted. I'm I don't know. I can't even remember any apologies I received, knowing that people must have apologized to me. But I don't know if it's just that I'm so self-referencing that I was oh no, I'm not a bad person, but this thing I said wasn't kind. So let me apologize. I just knew it from just how I separation. Am. But
how powerful, man.
Well, I think that's a key takeaway, though. There has to be the separation of the individual from action. I mean, I think just as a culture, as a society, we can do a lot more of that in a lot of ways. But I think it's truly changing the way I think about apology. And I guess it's separating my value from the apology, but it's also separating the other person's right or wrongness from the apology as well. That's really blowing me away that they could never think they're right or wrong and it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
That is going to be harder for me to let go, but I'm hearing you say it and I'm seeing the freeness in that. And I see the freeness as more valuable than the need for me to pull out their recognition of their wrongness.
I'll say I don't know if it's necessarily my self-referencingness now that I've put a name to it. I'm just going to keep calling it that. But I also feel, or I don't know if I experienced it once and realized, whoa, I want to do this all the time, but not taking on them needing to forgive me was always very important, is always very important because I feel taking on other people's burden. We've talked about the feelings and how I would often, when people express their feelings and emotions to me, I would feel burdened and they were trying to push them on me. Now I recognize that's not what was happening. It's just, I felt overwhelmed. And so I tried to do things to not make myself feel overwhelmed. And so accepting that I need to apologize, that I did something wrong, but not expecting anything from the other end means that now I'm not waiting for the other person to give me the apology and just waiting around because it might not happen. And also if they don't give me forgiveness, then it's not me sulking around for a long time because this person, never forgave me. I can move on in the relationship. Or for me, add that bit of information to my personal database about that person. Wow, they're not very forgiving. And so quite honestly, it would affect the relationship. Like, I wouldn't be waiting for the forgiveness, but I would know, oh, wow, they're still holding this grudge against me. Well, then I may not need to have that much of a relationship with them anymore.
Right. Noted.
Yep. Noted.
Mm-hmm.
But aren't these things directly tying back to yours, Jessica? Like, it's almost like Kia's released the things that make the apology go bad, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's just when she's saying that, she's like, well, I'm not worried about the forgiveness. And I was like, there's one, like it's just interesting seeing how you've highlighted these issues with what makes apologies good or bad, or what makes them hard. Mm-hmm. And then Kia's given us a real life example of, it's a really, again, going back to self-reflection, you have to release those things in order to to get past those challenges.
Yes, you do. Yes. Yeah.
So we talked about the three main barriers, and it seems like subconsciously, maybe consciously, what's the opposite of a barrier? Created paths, bridges to apology. There we go.
Yeah. I mean, you don't belong to any of those categories, or at least in this example. I mean, you might sometimes.
Oh yeah,
occasion.
I don't believe it.
Just like sometimes I don't feel any barriers, right? Just like sometimes, depending on what it is, I feel like, oh yeah, I should apologize for that. I'm going to apologize for that. And then it's more about the steps. Like, did I apologize in quotes properly? Right? Did I actually do the actions, not what was standing in the way of me apologizing in the first place?
The thought that I've been struggling with is that maybe it's not like, where would it fit in where you feel as though in your three barriers, Jessica? I feel like a barrier for me is that it does evoke that weakness. And I think maybe it is that second one again about that perception, because the way we framed it here is that the perception is it will degrade your self-image. But I guess that language didn't trigger for me because it was more like, it will make me feel weak, and I guess I see how they're the same now, but just in that moment of talking about weakness and vulnerability, those aren't things that I was raised to have, right? I was raised to be strong and resilient and all of these things that can get framed positively, but they leave lots of gaps for understanding the power of vulnerability. And as I've grown in this process, I can see why this one would land so hard for me, because that's the area I've been doing the most work. Is like, I can be vulnerable and I can be strong, right? I can be both of those things. And the apology is kind of like a remnant of that. Still, it's a relic of the fact that, like, I don't want to be weak. That's still my base. I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be perceived as weak. And if I have to apologize to you and you don't give me some kind of space to say we were both equally as weak, then I end up viewing myself as subpar to you. And that's just not an image I could historically have for myself. Now I can see how that's inaccurate, but it is like a journey. And this is why this episode has been so kind of patched up for me, because it's hitting directly to something that has been a core belief for most of my life. And like on other episodes, it's like, yeah, emotional intelligence. Yeah, I can be vulnerable. Yeah, when I'm not wrong. You know what I mean? And we've entered into phase 6 of the process, right? Like,
see, you're saying weakness. And so your weakness fits. Well, I shouldn't speak for you. Let me speak for me. My weakness, the way I view weakness, is very much that first one, is very much that valuing a relationship with other people. And to need other people, that's where I see weakness. That's what I see as weak, right? And so that's how I fit into that, like that first level of concern for the relationship kind of thing of like, well, that's my barrier. Like if I don't admit that I need to apologize to you, that means that I don't admit that I need this relationship, right? That I need other people in my life, that I rely on a community.
Oh my God.
And you're seeing, the way that I'm interpreting what you're saying is your weakness is about yourself. So again, that like kind of.
Well, because it's just, I can't wait till we start talking about Enneagram more next season. Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert, right? But I am just hearing you talk about it, knowing what I know of you, Jessica, as an 8, and knowing what I know of myself as a 4, and knowing what I know of Kia as a 5. I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's because I'm concerned about my image to the rest of the world. I'm concerned about how I'm perceived.
I'm concerned with my relationship to other people.
Right. And Kia's only concerned with her relationship to Kia.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So if I admit that I was wrong, that I have the power to damage a relationship, that means that I have to admit that I also have the power to mend a relationship, or also that relationships have some kind of power over me. Like, it's all this, like, that's what I view as weakness, which is bizarre.
It's a whole nother episode.
It's a whole other thing. Are you learning about us, Kia?
I know. I got a database full. Like the Danielle and Jessica folders in the database are just.
I don't like you knowing this much about my challenges. We talked about this. We've talked about this.
So, any final thoughts for this day's therapy session?
Isn't that what it's become?
It has.
Like, I've got my neck all tied up. I'm like, I'll just hug myself.
You don't want to talk anymore. That's what you're doing. You're protecting your neck physically. You don't want to talk anymore. Man, I don't have anything else to say. I really, knowing that I fit into one of those 3 barrier categories really is going to help me in the future kind of attack that. And then I will focus on those 7 steps that you brought up, Kia, right? Like, I've got to get to the apology before I can think about what makes a good apology. And in the meantime, when I'm up against an apology that I know that I have to make, I don't feel that barrier to, I will practice these 7 steps, right?
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
We talked last episode about practicing where it's more safe for you.
Yes.
You don't have to practice in the toughest conversation you're ever about to have.
Right.
But there's plenty of opportunities maybe not every day, but often to practice some of the skills and topics we talk about.
Phew. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for listening with us today. We've got some more goodness coming up for you this season. And in the meantime, continue to have candid and fruitful conversations.
Open up.
Yes!
That brings us to the end of this Canned Fruit podcast episode. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. We also want to thank our assistant producer, Brianna Jovan from What's Good Productions. If you enjoyed our show, we invite you to connect with us on Instagram at Canned Fruit Pod and email us at cannedfruitpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your favorite shows. And be sure to come back next time for another discussion as we continue to have candid and fruitful conversations. Until then, this is Jessica, Kia, and Danielle. And don't forget to open up.